As I've shared with everyone, we're really grateful to have Bob with us. He has been, well, I'm not going to say how long, but he's been doing this for a long time. and he brings a wealth of expertise, not just about business and management, but also how leadership and management are translated into various sectors, including education and human services. Bob has also got his own deep experience of Catholic spirituality. Specifically, I know we have an Ignatian focus in this particular group. It kind of goes with the territory. But recently, he had a very powerful experience of visiting Jerusalem with a group of faculty. And gosh, Bob, I still, consider the things that you shared about that experience of accompanying your fellow, Georgetown colleagues, and that as a pilgrimage experience. So he's a man of deep values and concerns for the church and the world, and we're really grateful to have him. So without more ado than that, okay, Bob, take it away.
Thank you, David. Bon pomeriggio, buenas tardes, good afternoon from the States. Today I'm going to talk about topics that are central to achieving mission success for you, and that's about management and leadership. I am going to give you different frameworks and models that build on what you've already done, but try to expand them further. And then I built in time for reflection and dialogue. And that'll be most of the session. But I want to give you a framework, a way of thinking about things. So I like to say, people say, Bob, how is teaching? And I said, my best friend is Zoom. So I'm getting really good at Zoom. And so I'm going to share my screen in terms of management and leadership in the church. That is what we are going to focus on. Let me begin with the sage wisdom of the great management theorist of the 20th century, Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker said this: management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. That is what you're called to do. You are asked to do things right, but also do the right things. I just thought such a profound insight to get us to begin to talk about different ways of thinking about and living out management and leadership. How are they different? Well, they are different. Management and leadership are different sets of skills, both of which are necessary for the Catholic Church, your respective organization, the dicastery, agency, to achieve mission success. You need both sets of skills, management and leadership. I will suggest today that we need more leadership than we have in the past. For me, it's not either or, is it management or leadership? It's both and. It's management and leadership. You need both. Mm-hmm. And part of my message to you today is if you don't have certain skills, then you have to surround yourself with people on your team that have those sets of skills to do that. But we're going to focus in on these skills. I'm going to share with you 5 different models of management leadership skills. And they are very parallel. They will build on each other. I will first talk about Henry Mintzberg when he talks about managing and leading. We'll talk about
do you have to close?
And transformation.
Do you want to close?
We'll talk about technical and adaptive. Ron and Heifetz, adaptive leadership is what you have been doing this week. David and his team have been helping you through adaptive leadership. And then we're going to talk about VUCA, which I know that you're familiar with VUCA, But I want to introduce you to VUCA 2.0, a way of thinking about leadership in this world that we're in. But then to come to what Pope Francis is calling for, a spirituality of accompaniment and administration, all which build on each other. So let's talk about the contribution of Henry Mintzberg, one of the great theorists of the 20th century into the 21st century. He makes the first big distinction, and this is one we're familiar with, but we still have to begin at the beginning. Managing for him is things come down from the hierarchy. Comes the strategy, it's clear, it's deliberate, and it's bold. The focus is on top-down decision-making and implementing those decisions. He contrasts that, compares it with the spirit of what he calls leading. In this view, an organization is not a vertical hierarchy, it's an interacting network. To lead is to help bring out the energy that exists naturally within the people to solve problems that can grow into big initiatives. It's a sacred trust earned from the respect of others. So managing is top down, senior leadership makes decisions, people below implement. Leading says, while we have a hierarchy, it's better to view the organization's interacting network. And to lead, your leadership is to help bring out the energy that exists naturally within people. And that's a sacred trust. This distinction between managing and leading is also seen in the contribution of James McGregor Burns, who wrote about transformational leadership. Burns identifies two types of leadership: transactional, which is really a focus on managerial skills, and transformational, which is about leadership skills. Transactional leadership, much like Mintzberg's focus on managing, it's a focus on exchange between the leader and the follower. You give directions, you provide rewards for task accomplishment. If you don't do it properly, we create sort of, coercive moves to get you to do things. That's the approach. Sometimes you need that. One of my professors, when I was an undergraduate, way back in the other century, he said that people do the things. Cecil Bell was his name. He's no longer with us, but he has a big influence on me even today. He said people do the things they want to do and the things they have to do. And that explains all behavior. Transactional leadership is more about the have-to-dos. Transformational leadership is about the want-to-dos. What Burns argues is what leaders need to do is focus on the beliefs, the needs, the values of their followers to get people to want to change and to lead change. So again, similarities: to want to lead change, to be part of change, and want to change. It's within us if we just bring that out. And then there's the contribution of Ronald Heifetz. Heifetz distinguishes between, and I know you've been introduced to this, between technical problems and adaptive challenges. Technical problems requires managerial skills, where you have a clear problem definition and you have a clear solution. Who does the work? The authorities. So much of what is done in my university called Georgetown and in the Catholic Church is managerial skills, technical problems. There's things that come to you very clear. But increasingly, and the focus of this program, is so much of what comes to us, we don't know what the problem is. We got to figure out what the problem is about, and can we come up with creative solutions? These are the leadership skills to deal with adaptive challenges. How do you define the problem? A problem well defined is a problem half solved. The challenges you face in trying to bring people forward, to engage people, synodal leadership, those are adaptive challenges. We have to find solutions involving people to identify new ways, new values, and new mindsets. That is what I hear Pope Francis calling for. And running into some tension between people who want to just view everything as a technical problem. And not that he doesn't get technical problems. He does. In the morning, he starts off with all the financials. He gets that. But how do we bring out the best in people to achieve the greatness and the mission of church to be true to the fidelity of Christ? That's adaptive challenges. How do you engage people to define the problem and solve the problem? Who does the work? The people with the problem. Again, each of the three models thus far have a consistent focus. Managerial is about top down. We have solutions, we implement them. Leadership is about engaging people, working them to come up with creative ideas, identify the problems, engage them for their imagination and creativity to lead change. So the locus of change is down below, not just above. Another model, the VUCA world. VUCA and VUCA 2.0. I live in a world where everything's an abbreviation, so I always love when I get abbreviations. You know, because I know you've been introduced to VUCA, that approach is really a managerial emphasis because of VUCA world, and we do live in a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. It's not just change, it's a lot of change. Even this week for you, it's been a volatile change. Are we going to be in the aula, our own office? It's uncertain. We're going to navigate this. You have a leadership team, David and others, who are helping you navigate it. It's complex. It's ambiguous. The emphasis often in the approaching a VUCA world is analyzing and predicting the results of actions, more of a managerial emphasis. But there's an emerging view that is also relevant to you. The first one's relevant to you, but this is even more relevant to you. VUCA 2.0. This is a leadership emphasis. VUCA 2.0 stands for this: vision, understanding, courage, adaptability. The emphasis in a VUCA 2.0 world, a VUCA 2.0 world, is on mission and values. You are all mission-driven people. That is one of the reasons I am so privileged and inspired to be with you. I wish I was with you in Roma, but I'm here in Washington, D.C. But you are mission-driven people, and I'm inspired to be with you, even if virtually. Because what you do is you're trying to bring out the greatness of people and live out the mission and fidelity to Christ. That's inspiring. But it's also, this VUCA 2.0 is engaging people. You need to engage people, which means you have to let go. And that can be scary. When I had let my kids drive the car alone for the first time, wow! The first couple of times I followed them, half a mile behind. But they had to let go. You dare to take risks. You dare to take risks. And that's what you're being asked to do, to take risks. And you have to be flexible and agile. Again, all of these parallel models. The key theme before I get to Pope Francis is, how do we engage people? Tap into their greatness, their God within. We have gifts. Can we engage them to solve the larger challenges, not just of today, but of tomorrow? What is being called forth for the Catholic Church today? It is a spirituality of accompaniment and administration. The call to action by Pope Francis, and he's been busy the last few days because I even read the newspapers here. The call to action is for leadership and management to be guided by a spirituality of accompaniment and administration. Pope Francis sees the value of leadership and management, both. But he's calling for it to be guided by a spirituality of accompaniment and administration. What does that mean? A spirituality of an accompaniment, which I know you've been talking about, living out. It's about being present for others. I will accompany you. David brought up the Magis trip to the Holy Land that we did last December into January. I mean, I spent New Year's Eve in Bethlehem. That's where we were. Because that day we had went to visit where Jesus was born. And so we were in Bethlehem. And we were accompanied by a Jesuit Catholic priest, Mark Bosco of Georgetown University, Rabbi Rachel from Georgetown University, and Imam Hindi from Georgetown University. And they accompanied us on the most profound experience my wife and I have had, apart from having our two children and watching them grow up. It was so profound. I'm still processing it, but we were accompanied, learning, listening. And part of that journey there is the journey for you personally in your leadership, but also the people you lead. The focus has to be on dialogue. I spent time in Palestine. I spent time in Israel. I spent time there, and it was about a dialogue and getting different perspectives and trying to understand the world. It was about building a trust. Trust. That's accompaniment. A dialogue is the way we work. It's not a monologue top down. It's a dialogue, a conversation. And by having that dialogue and building that trust because you're having dialogue, it's about imagination. Dare I say, a moral imagination. How can we make the world a better place in fidelity to Christ? In what Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit are calling us to do. But it also is about co-creation. Co-creation. How do you create together? If I give you one phrase to take away from today, and hopefully I give you more than one phrase, I want you to keep focus on co-creation as a key phrase of leadership and the spirituality of the company. It's about co-creation. Tapping into engaging people for their gifts, their talents, because they want to. The youth, the women, the underrepresented. But Pope Francis also calls for a spirituality of administration. It's just not running the numbers, although that's really important. It's not just running a bureaucracy, although that's really important. But how do you create a diverse, talented team? How do you embrace their gifts? Bring them in. Administration is now viewed not just as management, but as servant leadership. How do you serve people? Do you recognize them? Do you encourage their growth? Do you give them opportunities? It is both. I will accompany you, but I will embrace your gifts. The people that work with you and for you have tremendous gifts. Do we engage those? That's the spirituality of accompaniment and a spirituality of administration. I want to give you one quotation. I'm a big believer in quotations, which I call sage wisdom. And then I'm going to ask if you have any questions before I send you off to accompany each other on some reflection first, then some dialogue. Let me give you the piece of wisdom from Pope Francis. And Pope Francis said this: we need a church capable of walking at people's side, of doing more than simply listening to them. Dialogue is our method. not as a shrewd strategy, but out of fidelity to the one who never wearies of visiting the marketplace, even at the 11th hour, to propose his offer of love. Dialogue is our method. Let me ask you this question. Are there any questions for Bob that you have? I know I went over several decades of research, but there's great commonalities of themes being management and leadership and what we are being called to. Do we answer that vocational call? Do you have any questions? Comments?
I I have a question, Robert.
Yes, Marcus.
Yeah, you are using servant leadership, and some people they use serving leadership. Is there any difference according to you?
I'm sorry, my connection wasn't.
Yeah,
Servant leadership and what?
you use the term servant leadership.
Right.
Some people use to say serving leadership. Do you see any difference between these two terms?
Between serving leadership and
And
servant.
servant leadership, yes.
No, I only follow Robert Greenleaf's. I don't see anything in terms of practice. If you're serving people, for me, that's part of servant leadership or vice versa. It's the same for me. Okay. Because the issue is the key word is service and serving others to uplift them, to help them realize their greatness. And part of it is you are serving others. Is that helpful? Thank you. Other questions? Teresa.
I was just thinking how to formulate the question, because I believe very much in this serving or servant leadership, but sometimes don't you think it can be seen as a sign of weakness when you are always giving the word to the others, or are always entering a dialogue, or always, you see, do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. I don't see it as a sign of weakness. For you to engage people for a dialogue, which would be part of servant leadership, you're actually showing a sign of strength because you trust people. You're vulnerable. It's about courage to be vulnerable. But what you get out of that in return from the people that you're engaging in a dialogue with is you get their ideas, their energy, and their greater commitment to work with you to work on the mission. I view it as a sign of strength. There are many people that do, you're correct, that view it as a sign of weakness. But that's because they're grounded in a more authoritarian management perspective on how leadership should live out. I mean, I can go back to the ultimate servant leader in that person called Jesus, of Nazareth. And there were many people that thought he was weak, but in fact, I view it as incredible strength. That was, and having been there and, walked everywhere he did on the Stations of the Cross, that was a sign of strength. But the dominant model, but people in power want to keep that power. And so they're going to keep reinforcing ways of leading, which is usually top down to maintain their power. I'm saying the power is in the people. If we engage them, give them direction, help them to help us on achieving mission success. Is that helpful, Teresa? Thank you.
Can I ask you something, Bob?
Absolutely.
Bob, for me, like the church has been traditionally been very hierarchical. Yesterday we talked about collegiality and synodality. Has been extremely, and even now most part of the church is that way. How do you think? What are the block? How do we really get across these ideas of servant leadership when the whole structure of the church is still hierarchical and Pope Francis is kind of a loner?
Well, first off, it's hard to change any organization let alone one that's been around for many centuries, where there's a lot of change and tradition. I can give you two different answers, George. Okay, two different answers. I can probably give you more, but I'll just start with two. One is that if you want to change and by the way, the questions that you are raising, as David points out, we will be addressing in greater detail, but I'll give you a preview. No spoiler, I'll just give you a preview. One way to think about changing organizations is you've got to change structure, incentives to try to move it, but that requires leadership. And organizations are going to resist change because it's about, I want to keep my power. And they can justify it because we've always done it that way. But my approach is, Charles Kettering, an inventor, once said, if you've always done it that way, it's probably wrong. Okay? And I'm at a third century institution called Georgetown University. I think we are still doing things the way the Jesuits did back in 1789, which is not old by European standards or African standards. Okay, it's not old. But the other way to think about change is that you also look for opportunities for experiments. I see Pope Francis doing experiments around the world, in South America, for example. How can we experiment? And that'll be part of the message of the second module, is how do we experiment? But to understand that people's first reaction to change is to resist it. But that's why it requires the leadership and the courage and the willingness to, sometimes you're going to fail, but to get back up and then try to broaden the number of allies that you have to work with you. My philosophy is stand up, but never stand alone. You know, Jesus had 12 disciples. He engaged people. I go back and look at how he led. Does that give you a bit of an answer? I mean, we only have a limited time, but that give you enough of an okay, thank you. Here's what I want us to do. Yeah, Emilio.
That's
And as well.
sorry.
Did you want to say something, Emilio, before I continue?
I just want, is me talking? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Bob, thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the presentation. It's very, very clear. I have just a little question about the relationship between the VUCA world and the VUCA 2.0.
Yeah.
How are they connected there? Yeah.
Well, they both recognize the VUCA conditions of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But many people who focus on VUCA often focus more on the managerial decision-making, predicting consequences part of it. VUCA 2.0 brings out more clearly the leadership implications of the VUCA model, where it's about vision, it's about understanding, it's about courage, it's about adaptability. So that just highlights more the leadership part that sometimes gets lost in the VUCA world. Is that helpful, Emilio? Okay.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Bob,
I'm gonna go on to the next part, if that's okay. Hopefully that helped, Emilio.
Okay.
that was Fra's turn, but Emilio wants to speak.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Just a question on a topic on which we discussed already yesterday, speaking of synodality. One of the characteristics of transformational leadership is also the ability to engage people on shared value. Now, the difficulties that I faced in its personal experience is that it's very difficult to engage people when you don't have shared value on the basis. And so, how do you think we can overcome and engage people to overcome this kind of problems? Because if you don't have a shared value at the basis, it's quite difficult to practice synodality, as we spoke yesterday, but also to achieve the results that the organization want to achieve?
That's a great question. My first two quick answers to that, Emilio, is that within the team you lead, the people you lead, there has to be something that's shared for them to come work with you, to be part of your, there has to be some, at some level, some shared values. I would begin with those shared values. You may want to expand it to have an additional set of shared values, but that will require you first to have a vision, connecting it back to the mission and values of your organization. And then you have to model it. You have to lead by example. And I will tell you this, it will take time. It may require that you have to bring in new people or reorganize. There may be challenges of that in your organization. I respect that, I know that. But you have to think in terms of those terms. Those terms. That would be my first introduction and reaction to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get you on to reflection. You were going to say something, Flavio?
Just a quick question. What about the process of delegation in this new model of leadership? Does it make sense to speak about delegation process, or makes no sense anymore?
No, I think, Flavio, delegation is clearly a critical process, particularly in the synodal leadership, to delegate. But my approach to delegation is I give freedom within fences. I have to trust the people. And I've always liked the image of freedom within fences. The question is how high the fences, how close the fences. But in order to engage in the model of leadership that I'm talking about, you have to share, you have to delegate, but they better understand it. You have to have those shared values that Emilio was raising questions about, but they also have to have the skills. Do you trust them? And maybe you just give them a little bit, then they give a little bit more. But yes, delegation is part of it. For me, delegation is more of a sharing of your power. And that is why it's so difficult for people to give it up. These are great questions. Let me give you some questions for you to reflect on. Here's what I want you, and I'm going to give you about 12 minutes to reflect. Just reflect where you are in your office, your aula, your personal aula. Think of a time in which you acted with the spirituality of accompaniment or administration in your leadership role. Think of a time when you acted with the spirituality of accompaniment and administration. You have. You may not have labeled it that way, but you have. What did you do? Was it easy or hard for you to do? We'll take Flavio's example. Maybe delegating was part of the accompaniment administration. Was that easy for you to do? Was it hard for you to do? I'm just playing off the example of Flavio. What impact did it have on the people you lead? So I want you to reflect for about 12 minutes. Write down with your pencil or paper or your whatever you capture your ideas with. Think of a time you acted with the spirituality of accompaniment or administration in your leadership role. What did you do? Was it easy or hard for you to do, and why? What impact did it have on the people you lead? You understand what I'm asking you to do? Reflect for 12 minutes on those questions, okay? And then we'll go to breakout rooms for you to share. So 12 minutes. Time is up. I now need you to go to breakouts of 3 people. Pablo has all the power and the wisdom to do that, I'm pretty sure. But I want you to share your stories. Storytelling has already been a key theme of this program. Okay, story. In fact, you'll be able to tell stories after this week is over about how you transcended the challenges. You'll be able to tell stories. Storytelling is part of accompaniment too, sharing the stories. Remember, that was the primary way that Jesus taught, was parables and stories. How do you connect people? It's the most powerful way. You learned from Janine about storytelling earlier today. For me, it's one of the most important leadership skills is sharing stories. And now share the stories of you, the impact you have, but to be vulnerable to share that. And what do you learn? When you listen to the stories, I want you to listen for what I call the music and the lyrics. The lyrics are the words. What are they describing? What are you describing? And then listen to the music. What is the emotions behind the story? Are you picking up on joy, fear, uncertain? Listen to both what they say and the emotions behind it. With that, we're going to give you about 25 minutes to do that in groups of 3. So they get a good time to share stories and learn from each other, okay? To encourage each other. In fact, let me bring you up what I want you to do is say more. Share reflection, provide encouragement. Listen, then provide encouragement, how to identify new ways to lead with the spirituality of accompaniment. So not only listen, what do you learn, but can you encourage to do more? So you're accompanying them in this exercise. And then we'll come back to see what did we learn. I am glad I heard some people say they really had a great time talking and listening. I want you to share some of the insights, the lessons, things you heard. I'd like to hear from people maybe I haven't heard from before or want to get it out there first. I want to hear what you heard and what you took away. What you took away. What did you learn?
Can I start?
Okay, Marcus.
Thank you. We were 3 in the group with Sister Cecilia and our brother Rudolph. And we had a very wonderful sharing among us. And what came out that we were very happy with these 2 terms you addressed to us, Robert: spirituality of accompaniment and spirituality of administration. It's nothing better and stronger than having spirituality in our service. And what comes out, I can summarize in 2 points. After sharing our stories and opinions, we do agree to say that the spirituality of accompaniment is very productive in the sense that it creates a personal relationship between leaders and other people. So we would like to highlight the quality of the personal relationship, a relationship on personal level. It makes sense and it's very important. And the second thing is we agree to say that most of things in our life follows the rule of mutuality. You will receive much more than you give. And that is a grace based also in our life as religious, in our respective religious communities. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your group sharing. Powerful insights. Other reflections, insights, lessons learned, how it felt when you're hearing these powerful stories.
May I?
Ernesto.
Yes, Ernesto.
And our group sharing was also very, very rich, very good. There was a point, at a certain point I shared with them and I want to share with the group is I believe strongly in all this process, in co-create, and I think more and more probably in our congregations, we are trying to move in that line. and I share the experience on that. But there is a point that at a certain point, what is like the good keep balance between when you do all this process and at the same time you are the leader with your council, the authority at the level, for instance, of the congregation. And there is a point that unfortunately also there could be like bad things coming, like people, because of the way you trust on them, they can easily like abuse of that power or start even want to take like your role, right? And there is a point that, well, at a certain point you have to decide things in despite of all this nice process, right? And my question is, or the comment is, sometimes if the more we involve the people, probably the more easy we can exercise the authority, especially at a certain point when you take a decision that sometimes is not well understood, or you cannot explain everything why you took that decision. Then just to say, at the end of the day, in all this, we need like a good balance. But I believe strongly that the more we involve the people, we get the people on board, the better probably we can exercise the authority when needed. It's just about that.
That is a great observation and insight, Ernesto. If I heard you correctly, the more that you engage people so they understand, the more authority that you have. Is that correct? Did I capture that pretty close? And I will tell you that if you at least engage them to understand, it does give you more authority because they understand it. I know from my research on the delivery of bad news, which I spent a lot of time studying over the last few decades, people need to understand why. And part of their frustration is they don't understand why, but if at least in the room and they understand because you've explained it, but also you listen to them, which might help you understand them too, you're going to get much more acceptance, which gives you more authority. That's the paradox. By giving them, including them, you actually get more power. That's the paradox. You get a lot in return, that mutual, you get that too. That's a great observation. That's a great insight. Other people.
Bob, before you
Yes.
go on, one thing I think that is important to consider, I put this in the chat, and this is an important area for research in this field of leadership, is that situation matters. And situation and style of the use of power and authority need to match one another in order for the occasion and the situation to be managed and led effectively. This morning was not an emergency, so the unilaterality wasn't really appropriate. And in my moment of impatience and frustration, I allowed that to get to me instead of actually pausing, taking a breath, and checking in. There are so many situations where emergencies do require unilaterality. But if unilaterality is the general way of proceeding because we're in a bureaucratic top-down structure, this does not foster the community that we're talking about. So there is a time and place. And I think, Bob, what you're getting at is that generally speaking, the church needs to lean in the direction of greater mutuality. And that in fact, synodality requires it. At the same time, synodality still demands that there is someone who makes the final decision. And this is one of the features of discernment in common that we'll face next time round in our second module. So every voice is heard, but it's still not a democracy. And there's a difference. And I think that those of us who are accustomed to living and working in democracies expect and want to have our voice equal a vote. Unfortunately, the church doesn't operate in that way, and there are downsides because of majority rule that are problematic and that the church guards against. Does this make sense? Majority rule can be so problematic because if the majority is not well informed, if the majority is being coerced by power dynamics and lobbies. So anyway, we can make more time for this conversation, but I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Other people, talk about the stories you heard, the lessons you learned.
Can I?
Yes, George, yes.
I was very lucky to be with Mary and Eulalia. We had 3 different stories. But then there were two common elements. One was accompaniment was the decisive factor in whatever the three different things we did. Accompaniment. And then along with accompaniment, we also made sure there were expertise. So they were consultants. See, for example, I'm sure Mary might talk about it. Mary said she had a consultant when she came and she found the consultant useless for our purpose. But then the moment accompaniment came in, expertise, we needed a consultant also. So therefore, that is the tremendous insight. How do we combine accompaniment with professional expertise, and then we function better. So there's a beautiful sharing, and thank you for this platform. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Others? Christiane? I can't hear you.
Our conversation in our group, we talked about the transparency. I mean, the importance of the leader to be a human person who has the faculty of be fragile or have doubts or ask questions or be always open to receive suggestions and to ask, demand help. Hello, help! I don't know how to do this. Please help me. and this is very, very important to share your difficulties, so you can gain respect because you are a human being, and then it's important to have the courage to take a decision, but nobody's perfect, so you can I mean, even if you take the wrong decision, you will be understood because you have shown that you were maybe in a trouble or maybe in doubt. So if the more colleagues I hear and I ask, the less possibility I have to take the wrong decision. So, and the transparency is, for me, it's very important, and the courage also after.
That is a great example. That is really a profound example. The asking for help, the vulnerability, but also the courage in connecting those two. One of the things I like to say is that leaders are signal senders. They're sending signals all the time. The question is, what signals are they sending? What signals are you sending? And by being vulnerable, by engaging people, getting their input, you're sending a very powerful signal about the value of other people and about your leadership. And it actually gives you great strength, because the reality is we all make mistakes, but do we learn from them to become better? But you're less likely to make the mistakes as you talk if you engage more people. But that's real hard to be vulnerable. It's real hard to be vulnerable, but that's the courage, I think, that you need, are being called to be vulnerable, that people actually are inspired by that. Thank you for sharing. It's a great example. We have time at least for one more example, one more reporting out. Sandra?
Yeah, I just found Ernesto's comment about the importance of authority and making decision very relevant. And it made me think that often we associate authority to power and our relationship to power to this concept. And I think it helps us to ask ourselves whether we're exercising power over somebody or we're exercising power with. So our fear of not abusing authority may make us reluctant leaders. And I think while we're keeping in mind the importance of hierarchy and structure and their need for leading a group, discerning how we're exercising this authority might keep us in check.
Can I add to what Sandra just said brilliantly? As I was thinking about it, to tie back to you, Ernesto, authority is sometimes it's given to you in a position. But I think what you were trying to say, and Sandra's trying to say, I think, is that the authority comes from below. If they support you, they endorse you, they see the wisdom, the fairness, the transparency, to go back to Christiana. If you see that, they endorse you, which gives you more authority, a moral authority, not a position authority, but a moral authority to influence and lead. And I think that's what you're being called to do, all of you. I need to bring it to closure. I wish I could be with you and have, oh, David, please.
Xavier, Jairaj, and we're okay. We're okay. And who else? And Laura. Okay. So Jairaj. Okay, you have to take yourself off mute though, Xavier.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, David.
I thought you wanted to say something. I'm so sorry.
No.
Okay, so Laura.
Yes, about accompanying leadership, you make me think that I'm a scout leader, and I thought in this year, I learned in this year that before speaking with one of my girls, I have to wait 1.5 years, not to do big problem with this girl, because she has to feel welcome by me before receive some, something to be said. Then if this process go well, she will say me a question that is the door open for me to go on.
That's a great example, Laura. It's a great example. If they applied that great insight, everybody here, to their leadership, what would that look like? And I think that you're highlighting something really important. Really important. Thank you.
And Flavio.
Reflecting on my experience on common discernment, sometimes I find the opposite position. There is some kind of ideology of in the conviction that the group has the power. The power raises from the basis, because sometimes the leader hides behind this and blocks the process of discernment, waiting for the group to give all the answers that are requested by the situation. I think that we can speak about power of the leader in the sense that the leader needs to be a coordinator that leads the group and recognizes what's happening inside the group. But this is a crucial point. The group has to be leaded in this. It's not just spontaneous for a group to recognize what's happening. Thank you.
No, and Flavio, I think there has to be some structure and there has to be some structure, some leadership role to make that happen. You're absolutely correct. Let me come back to something that Laura said, Janine said a chat to. I think this importance of trust, that in your example, you had to create a relationship where somebody trusted to send you a question. You built trust. In the second module, we're going to focus in on trust. I will suggest there's 3 kinds of trust you have to build, not just one. But trust is the most important social currency of your leadership, whether it be with scouts, whether it be in a dicastery, whether it be in religious organization. Trust is the single most important. And trust is real hard to build, but once you get there, what it unlocks is to get that question, wow, that is what you want to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just writing in the chat. There is a book by Stephen Covey that came out a few years ago called The Speed of Trust. And it makes the point that in such a high velocity change environment, we have to be able to make fast decisions. And the only way to make fast decisions is when you have lots of that trust in your organization and amongst your stakeholders. If you don't have trust, everything is slowed down, everything becomes more complicated. So actually, so we look forward, Bob, to that input next time round, either in the module itself or as a standalone session, as we're beginning to think about how we adapt going forward. Folks, I would invite you, as we have for Janine and Mark and others, to offer in your comments anything that you want to offer Bob as feedback, and also to use your reaction button if you like. We will be taking a 5-minute break and then doing our closing examen next. Okay?
David, can I just finish with my final quotations?
Yes,
My sage wisdom, because I have some pretty important people I want to quote.
Yes, so your screen.
From Pope Francis, in order to do good, we need memory, we need courage, and we need creativity. Final sage wisdom. The first is from Dorothy Day, who is the status of servant of God in the process of her sainthood pursuit. I think she is a saint, but servant of God is what we call her today. And Dorothy said this: the greatest challenge of the day is how to bring about a revolution of the heart. A revolution which has to start within each one of us. That's the greatest challenge. I think that's what you're being called to this week. I think that's what these models of leadership, how do you get the revolution of the heart? Saint Oscar Romero of El Salvador. Aspire not to have more, but to be more. I think that's what this first week and second week and anything else in between is about, that. And the last one, St. John Paul II. I plead with you never, ever to give up on hope. Never doubt, never tire, never become discouraged. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. I give you wisdom of saints, or someone's on the path to saint. Thank you for your generosity. It has been a joy for me to be with you today. A joy, true joy and inspiration.
Thanks, my friend. We are so grateful.